TIFU by messing around in Singapore and getting caned as punishment. I was born in Singapore, spent most of my childhood abroad, and only moved back at 17. Maybe if I grew up there I would have known more seriously how they treat crime and misbehavior. I didn't pay much attention in school and got involved in crime in my late teens and earlier 20s, eventually escalating to robbery. I didn't use a real weapon but pretended I had one, and it worked well for a while in a place where most people are unaccustomed to street crime, until inevitably I eventually got caught. This was during the early pandemic, so they maybe factored that in when giving me a comparably short prison term at only 2 years, but I think the judge made up for it by ordering 12 strokes of the cane, a bit higher than I expected. I knew it would hurt, but I had no idea how bad it actually would be. Prison was no fun, of course, but the worst was that they don't tell you what day your caning will be. So every day I wondered if today would be the day. I started to get very anxious after hearing a couple other prisoners say how serious it is. They left me in that suspense for the first 14 months of my sentence or so, until I began to try to hope, after hundreds of false alarms, of guards walking by the cell for some other purpose, that maybe they'd forget or something and it would never happen. But nope, finally I was told that today's the day. I had to submit for a medical exam and a doctor certified that I was fit to receive my punishment. My heart was racing all morning, and finally I was led away to be caned. It's done in private, outside the sight of any other prisoners. It's not supposed to be a public humiliation event like in Sharia. The punishment rather comes from the pain. I had to remove my clothes and was strapped down to the device to hold me in place for the caning. There was a doctor there and some officers worked to set up some protection over my back so that only my buttocks was exposed. I had to thank the caning officers for carrying out my sentence to teach me a lesson. I tried to psyche myself up thinking, okay, it's 12 strokes, I can do this. But finally the first stroke came. I remember the noise of it was so loud, and then the pain was so shocking and intense. I cried out in shock and agony. I tried then to get away, but I couldn't move. By the third stroke I could barely think straight. I remember feeling like my brain was on fire and the pain was all over my body, not just on the buttocks. I think I was crying, but things become blurry after that in my memory. I remember the doctor checking to see if I was still fit for caning at one point and giving the go-ahead to continue. After the 12th stroke they released me, but I couldn't move. 2 officers had to help me hobble off. They doused the wounds with antiseptic spray and then took me back to a cell to recover. My brain felt like it was melting from the pain, so my sense of time is probably a bit distorted from that day, but I remember I collapsed down in the cell and either passed out or went to sleep. But little did I realize that the real punishment of caning is more the aftermath than the caning itself. When I woke up the pain was still incredibly intense, but not so much that it was distorting my mind, which almost made it worse in a way. My buttocks had swollen immensely and any pressure on it felt like fire that immediately crippled me, almost worse than a kick to the groin. My first time I felt like I had to use the toilet. I was filled with dread because of the pain. I managed to do it squatting instead of sitting, but still, just the motion of going, 2 inches agitated all. The wounds and the pain was so sudden and intense that I threw up. I tried to avoid eating for a week because I didn't want to have to use the toilet. After a couple days the officers told me I couldn't lay naked in my cell anymore and had to wear clothes. This was scary because they would agitate the wounds. I spent most of the day trying to lay face down and totally still because even small movements would hurt so bad as the clothes rustled against it. This continued for about a month before things started to heal, and even then, these actions remained very painful, just not cripplingly painful. I didn't sit or lay on my back for many months. By the time I got out of prison I had mostly recovered, but even to this day, there are severe scars and the area can be a bit sensitive. It was way worse than I expected the experience to be. I know it's my fault, but I do wish my parents had warned me more about the seriousness of justice here when we moved back, though I know I wouldn't have listened as a stupid teen. Thankfully they were supportive when I got out and I'm getting back on my feet, literally and metaphorically. TL. Doctor got caught for robbery in Singapore. Found out judicial caning is way worse than I ever imagined.
You didn't mess around, you committed armed robbery.
At least you weren't involved in any sort of drug deal.
I found a video of it that got leaked many years ago. Warning, graphic. That was in Malaysia, but Singapore uses the same. Like that poor fellow only got a couple more strokes than Op was sentenced. First couple don't seem so bad, but by the that's worse than I expected it to even look. The whole butt seems to be ruined. How does one even heal from that?
IDK when Op got this. But the article you posted is from 2007 and called it "brutal and barbaric act of caning prisoners", yet it still seems to happen nowadays. Insane to think they still do this.
Yeah, committing armed robbery is a good way to get yourself shot to death. Op is lucky the judicial system caught him first.
Yes, you feud. You literally committed armed robbery, even if you were pretending to have the weapon. You coerced them to part with their money and belongings under threat of bodily harm and injury. Come on, this is not messing around. This is an actual crime and you were lucky you got away with just 2 years of jail. I don't even know why you thought Singapore would be relaxed on their justice system. We warn you on the plane ride in that if you come here with more than a certain amount of controlled drugs you will be subject to mandatory death penalty or life imprisonment. This is your mistake and your burden to typo.
Imagine having to wipe after that.
Not defending him, but not in Singapore. They have the lowest firearm death rate in the world, I believe.
Because our police are professional and our gun control laws are pretty good. So usually no one ends up getting shot unless there is a real threat to the PO life.
That's actually a really good point. I didn't realize gun ownership was so low in only on Reddit. Can you get downvoted for admitting you didn't know something, lol.
Holy, this was like one of those videos of seeing salt being placed on open flesh, but instead of salt it was further wounding to exposed flesh. Everything there is completely. I was expecting extreme welts and some breaking of the skin, but if they kept going we were going to see bone at some, well, maybe not at the, but that doesn't change how severe those wounds are.
Messing around is something else than armed robbery and thereby traumatizing PPL for life. You got what you country. Performing corporal punishment in the 21st century is certainly questionable, but on the other hand 2 years is not that long for what you have. What I know apt Singapore next time it probably will be the death penalty though.
I mean, it seems to have worked.
When I read the title I thought you scissor messed around scissor and got caught for adultery. Didn't realize it was actually for robbery.
Yeah, messing around is having consensual with single women.
Mandatory death penalty or life? Sweet Jeebus, for what drugs?
Can Google for a list of controlled substances in SG that you can't bring in. This includes.
One of them is, taking any products with it in them to Singapore can get you a death sentence.
Armed robbery, whether you had an actual weapon or not, is a serious crime in most countries. Lol, it's not messing around. Glad you are getting back on your feet and I hope you will stay on a good path regardless of which country you are in.
As a Singaporean, why would you do something like this? There are tons of benefits and schemes if you can't afford essentials. Why would you commit armed robbery, especially in a country where punishment are very harsh and overall safe? I don't understand the thought process here.
Imagine the pain your victims felt thinking they were going to die. Probably affects them to this day.
You wish your parents warned you? Man, you moved back at 17 and went committing crimes in your 20s. Anyone in Singapore for more than a few days would have known about the severity of criminal punishments. Well, at least you know now. At least you didn't foo to the point of dealing hard drugs.
Singapore does not believe in you own a gun to protect yourself nonsense.
An acquaintance of mine knows someone who committed in Singapore and was sentenced to the legal maximum of 24 strokes. Wonder how big of a difference there is in the effects of 12 vs 24. Are there diminishing returns, you think, or would it be much worse? It's hard to imagine something more painful than what Op.
It is scary. Having been through those airports as a child a million times, seeing signs everywhere threatening death with minimal understanding of it all, it is still pretty frightening to this day. There is also many stories out there of people sneaking drugs into strangers' bags. They are probably just stories, but still.
Question about the caning here. Does the skin split open from the caning? If it does, were there a lot of bleeding? Did you need stitches?
Yeah, caning is known to be painful. Depending on the culture and personal reservations, one might find it deserved or questionable. I'm betting you expected everyone to be shocked at your suffering. However, consider that your physical injuries lasted several months. You're probably healed now. your innocent victims with PTSD might still not even have begun healing. Some might be stuck for life. Calling several armed robberies messing around shows a lack of awareness or interest in other people's suffering, and complaints on how your parents didn't warn you enough is a strange attempt at shoving the responsibility onto them.
To be fair, they also do probably take the protection of their citizens seriously instead of having no obligation to protect, like some other police officers.
Interesting. Who overstay their visa in SG for more than 90 days are subject to mandatory caning of at least 3 not *. Overstay your visa in Singapore.
I don't understand the whole, my parents never told me how harsh Singapore would be toward crimes. Like, dude, really? Blaming your parents for not telling you that crime is bad? Like, how can you make it 17 years in life and assume that armed robbery isn't a big deal? And last I checked, I'm pretty sure armed robbery and any sort of crime in any country is bad, not just Singapore. Like, if you go to Canada or something and commit a similar crime there, do you assume you would just get a slap on the wrist? Or sounds like Op didn't actually learn his lesson and is just regretful he actually got caught and punished.
I would say it's worse, as you would make the open cuts in your ass even larger and deeper. Yes, it splits open into big open cuts. Probably looks like someone cut your ass with razor blades.
Anyone with a functioning brain anywhere in the world, and not just Singapore, would know that if you commit crimes, you get punished for it. Like, Op was in his 20s and blames his parents for not telling him crime was bad. Like, really, Op?
To an extent, he still thinks he was messing around when committing armed robbery, and then blames his parents for not warning him about the justice system. What a fool.
Multiple times as well. He didn't just do it once.
I didn't say it made him a good person. I'm just saying he doesn't sound very interested in laying on his chest for 2 months again.
You didn't hear about the guy who got lashings for spray paint tagging in Singapore? It's kind of a known deal that you don't go to Singapore and commit crimes.
Same, I was expecting graffiti or vandalism or something like that. Not repeated armed robbery.
I fell asleep on my flight to Singapore, woke up a landing card with the words, "Drug traffickers will be executed," staring at me in my groggy state. Needless to say, I shat myself before remembering I'm not a drug. Singapore is fantastic. One of the best places I've been.
I think the aftermath is actual caning. IMO might have a plateau where your body just stops feeling progressively worse if they'd let you pass out. Or like pause and continue after waking up. But that might happen too. Or you just not have any place to feel that pain anymore because it's just stripped 100%. A lot worse, IMO. He was also caned, I believe. And I've always heard that the doctor isn't there to make sure that you're fit for, he's there to make sure you don't pass out. They want to make sure you feel the full extent of each one. I think the American kid said that in a news interview after he got back. This makes me feel like they should put some kind of guard over ones.
He still doesn't really seem to get it, calling armed robbery messing around, and that bit about it working well for, and now blaming his parents for not telling him about the seems that head is pretty void of rational thought still. Absolutely zero realization what crimes he actually committed, nor empathy with any, just, "Oh, my butt hurts now."
Any 80s kid would probably remember Michael Peter Fay back in the 90s and him getting caned for vandalism. It was on TV for a few weeks because it was such a big deal in the US that Singapore was caning a US citizen. I remember seeing Lisa Ling report it from the hacienda on Whittle in homeroom before we went to classes.
If you assume that everywhere in the world gun laws are different from America, you will seldom be that most everywhere in the world, police will not just start shooting at the first opportunity they can, but will try to arrest or capture the. In other countries, mine included, often the police do have the obligation to protect citizens. In our police code, it's actually one of the first lines, and it's reinforced later on, by law.
Singaporean here who opposes the death penalty. However, you won't get the death sentence for just any product with in them. That only applies if you bring greater than 500 grams of it into the country.
Someone posted this video higher up. Warning.
I know it's my fault, but I do wish my parents had warned me more about the seriousness of justice here when we moved back. Still blaming someone else. Own to your own actions.
They do, around the spine area. Not your though, it's unlikely to hit the hole itself and more likely the buttocks area.